Hi, I'm Dr. Gemma Newman, also known as the Plant Power Doctor, and I'm your host for the Wellness Edit podcast with Holland and Barrett. In this episode, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dale Pinnock. He is a nutrition expert, he is a fellow podcaster, and he's a best-selling author. And he is a really trustworthy voice on all things nutrition. We went on an incredible deep dive into the power of nutrition to heal. We covered all sorts of topics. We talked about vascular disease, we talked about general health, we talked about diet fads. I think you're going to find this a really fascinating one. So I'm really looking forward to sharing it with you, and do let us know what you think. Hello, Dale.
How you doing?
I am doing really well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. It's nice to be able to join you on this.
Yes, we spoke not that long ago on your podcast, didn't we?
I know. It seems to be kind of sitting here having these conversations on these gadgets.
Oh, but I love it. I think, podcasting is a lovely way to let people free flow and share their knowledge and share some information, and also just feel a bit more free to get away from sound bites and get into the nuance and what's really important, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the big problems that we have at the minute is because everyone's pushed for time, and especially if you appear on a program or something, you've only got a couple of minutes and you've got to try and get everything in that short space of time, and you don't often have the opportunity to really kind of go down the rabbit hole and get into the kind of depth that this subject truly deserves. Yeah,
and you've been on a lot of TV things, haven't you, Dale? You've been in all sorts of TV shows. I
pop up now and again, yeah. I mean, it's been a bit quiet during the pandemic, but often sort of pop up with Holly and Phil quite often, or Lorraine, or doing some bits with the BBC. And I co-present a show on ITV as well called Eat, Shop, Save. We're in our 5th year, so yeah, do bits and bobs.
Yeah, and I think what's nice about that is that you can reach more people, but when you chat on a podcast, you can get down into those interesting weeds of nutrition a little bit more. And I know you've been doing this for so long. You've got over 26 years working in the nutrition industry, studying the subject to a degree level, postgraduate level. And, from my understanding, from knowing your work, you've absolutely dedicated your life to giving the facts behind what sometimes is quite confusing around nutrition. And so I suppose just to start us off, in case any of our audience doesn't know who you are, it would be lovely for you to share a little bit about why you decided to study this in the first place. What gave you this passion?
Yes, well, so like you said, 26 years in the industry. I mean, I've been into it since I actually first started getting into nutrition before I kind of moved into the career around about 1992. I was 15 years old at the time. Basically, from the age of about 10 or 11, I started getting quite bad acne. It was the summer of leaving primary school to go up to secondary school. That time in your life when you just start to become self-aware in relation to your peers. And all of a sudden, I started breaking out and looked like a second-hand dartboard. It wasn't good. It's
cruel, isn't it? Puberty is very cruel.
It is. I'll say, thank God the internet didn't exist back then. That's all I can say, because that would have been savage. But
I know.
I went to so many different practitioners. I went to different doctors and dermatologists, and I had all the usual things like oxytetracycline and Dalacin T. I don't know if you remember that, which is like a Pritt stick that you all over the area.
I do.
And nothing made a huge amount of difference. I mean, there was some marginal relief from the issue, but nothing particularly changed anything drastically. And I got to about 15 years old, so this was 1992. Sat around at my friend's house one night, feeling sorry for myself, feeling terrible because of the way that I looked. And my friend's mum was like, look, unless you change what's going on the inside, nothing's going to change on the outside. And, I was kind of like, okay, whatever, 15-year-old boy. I was like, yeah, if you say so. But she lent me this book, and it was a book called Fit for Life by Harvey Diamond. Obviously, you're looking back at it now, and it's potentially a little bit faddy. But back then, that was my first introduction to the whole field of nutrition. And I was willing to try anything. So I read this thing cover to cover in a weekend, and boom, there was the light bulb moment. I actually, for the first time, realized that we can, to one extent or another, actively engage in our own healthcare. And that planted the seed. And at that point, I over the years, I've tried pretty much every diet you could possibly imagine. Macrobiotic, Ayurvedic, raw food diets, ketogenic, all sorts of different things. And used myself as a guinea pig. I read over 1,000 books in a very short space of time. And at that time, I'd mucked about at school. I wasn't particularly academically minded, but finally I found something that actually ignited me and actually gave me a feeling of passion and purpose. And I got to around about 22, 23, and I was like, nothing else is captivating me in this way. I need to make a career out of this. And no, I was a little bit younger than that, like 19, 20 actually, and decided to go to university. I went and did my first degree in human nutrition, then did a second degree in herbal medicine. Not that I wanted to be a herbalist, but I wanted to understand more about phytochemistry, the actual study of active chemicals in plants that can deliver potentially pharmacological activities. And those same chemicals that are in the common medicinal plants, like echinaceas and ginkgos and those kind of things, are also present in culinary plants as well. The only real difference between the two is context of application. And then I did a postgraduate degree in nutritional medicine at Surrey. And then for all of my life, I've been cooking. I've always been an enthusiastic eater, I think is one way of putting it. And I just merged the two things together. It just seems such an obvious delivery system for the information. So, rather than standing in front of people and just giving a PowerPoint presentation, eat more of this, eat less of that. I mean, it's dull. It's great if you're in a lecture hall, but for the average person on the street, it just doesn't do anything. But if you can put that information into the context of actually preparing a recipe, saying, look, this is the science, this is how to apply it in your day-to-day life, this is how you make use of it, then all of a sudden it's a very, very different thing.
Yeah, I love it. I love hearing you talk about it. Your passion for this absolutely shines through. And it makes so much sense that your Instagram moniker is the Medicinal Chef, because you have come to appreciate that, food can be an amazing experience psychologically, physically, emotionally, on many different levels, but also the biochemistry of food. You really have sort of delved deep into that research. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what that meant to you and why you decided to have your name as the Medicinal Chef.
Well, I mean, the title, The Medicinal Chef, was deliberately provocative. I mean, especially at the time, because I did want people to think differently about their food. It was becoming really blatantly obvious around about that kind of time. This was in the early noughties, so about 2001, 2002, when I first took on that name, The Medicinal Chef. It was becoming more and more obvious that our food was more than just fuel, that it was becoming a very valid and very effective part of the therapeutic spectrum. I mean, I've never been in the alternative crowd. I need to really drive that home because, obviously there's a lot of scrutiny about this kind of stuff at the minute. I've never been of the alternative mindset. I've never been just like, oh, you've been hit by a bus, have some broccoli, you'll be fine. It's, never had that kind of attitude at all. It's like, if you need drugs, you need drugs. But that doesn't mean to say that you're passive in the process. There's things that you can do every single day to play a role in your own health outcomes. And I think that's crystal clear at the minute. What people overlooked for such a long time is that the food that we eat directly influences and potentially manipulates the internal biochemical terrain of our body. I mean, I will say when we talk about nutrients, I mean, obviously nutrients, you can divide them into two groups. We've got our macronutrients, which are fuel or repair and restore type nutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. And then we've got the micronutrients, the trace elements, the phytochemicals. With these, I always call them biochemical facilitators because they either make something happen or they make something that makes something happen.
Yeah.
And so many people overlook that. And it's just like, well, maybe if you kind of get a little bit back to how the things that you're putting into your body on a day-to-day basis are influencing your biochemistry day after day, then you might see that there's actually a role that it can play in helping you get healthier.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And I think it's something that it's hard to talk about these days because, there's a bit of a sort of pushback against the idea of using food as a way of helping you feel better. But it's undeniable that you can, and it doesn't negate the fact that food has many other roles in our life. Yeah. But as you've said, quite simply, it has a huge role in helping us to build a healthier body, or conversely, to bringing us to poorer health, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre when you kind of hear this pushback against the idea of, food as a therapeutic modality. I always bring up the example. It's like, okay, so if you walked into the doctor with hypertension and elevated cholesterol, and particularly elevated LDL cholesterol and high triglycerides and all of that kind of stuff, your doctor's not going to turn around and say, absolutely, carry on eating fry-ups, go to the takeaway every single day. That doesn't matter. One of the first things the doctor's going to tell you is, look, cut down on your saturated fat, address your diet and lifestyle. They're saying that because we understand that certain diets can have certain impacts upon physiological processes. So with that kind of established, accepted attitude, it's quite bizarre that when the conversation gets a little bit broader, there's still, I have to admit, it's a very, very small subset of the medical community, but there's still that kind of subset there that pushes against it. And bizarrely, I mean, when I was doing my postgrad at Surrey, most of the other students were either GPs or gastroenterologists because they were becoming acutely aware of the fact that, like, many of the things that are problematic in our health, or certainly in pre-COVID times at least, but the things that were big problematic issues in the healthcare service were things that had a very strong lifestyle element to them. And whilst they were able to certainly save lives and prolong life by giving pharmaceutical interventions, they realized it wasn't the whole picture, and they realized they had to have a better understanding of lifestyle medicine so they could give their patient a better therapeutic outcome in the long term.
I completely agree. Well, I do. That's exactly what we talked about recently, and it's what drives my passion for helping people with this. I think perhaps what might be a healthy way of looking at it is a huge understanding of how powerful it can be, combined with the empathy of understanding that people's life circumstances are very unique, and there's a certain subset of people who would really struggle to make changes, whether it's because of their social circumstances, their mental health, their budget, where they grew up, where they were born, all these sort of determinants of health that we can't control. And we can acknowledge that, of course, there are lots of things that we can't control. However, I think it's also important to be able to really empower people as best we can within their circumstances so that they can feel better about the choices that they have, even when their choices are limited.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? A lot of that comes down to the actual clinical relationship as well. I mean, there's advice that you can give on like a generic public health level, and certainly a lot of the things that I would be talking about would be certainly at that particular level. But then the whole patient-centered process that comes from an actual clinical consultation is worlds apart. And as you rightfully say, that's when you're working with the individual, where that person is at. But I would say, like, I always think there's room for something. There's always room for something, even if it's like you say, talking about the actual relationships with food and diet and that kind of stuff, or even if budget's stretched, it's like, okay, well, what have you got? What have you got? I mean, I'll tell you a little story. I did a thing for ITV News maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. We're working with these two girls that were living at the YMCA in Croydon. Now, these two girls, their combined weekly budget for food was £15 between the two of them, okay? And they were becoming heavily reliant on, a lot of the kind of frozen food outlets and these kind of things. They were spending all their money. They realized that they weren't necessarily nourishing themselves in the way that they should be. They weren't feeling too good. They couldn't have a social life. There was so much going on with these two young girls. And one of the first things I did was sit down to them and say, right, okay, how much do you know about what's available in your local area? How broadly do you look when you do your shopping? How often do you go to the market? And they said, what market? And there's a market smack bang in the middle of Croydon. So we literally went around the market and was like, okay, let's get some fresh produce. And we got bags and bags and bags full of food, and they struggled to spend a tenner. And then we were cooking big vats of like a spinach and sweet potato curry and then freezing individual portions. They started to stockpile amazing healthy food. They started to have money left over because they had more food on hand. And it was just looking at things a little bit differently, thinking outside the box and, moving beyond the typical kind of condition patterns that they were in.
Wow, that's a really inspiring story. Thank you for sharing it. And I found something similar with some of my patients. You don't have to necessarily have these big overhauls because you have to meet someone where they're at.
Yes.
And, I've had elderly patients who have really struggled to cook. And in those scenarios, there are certain ready meal recommendations that I've been able to give them that had healthy whole food ingredients that I knew that were within their budget, but also meant that they didn't have to, try to think too hard about things like cooking when they had really poor manual dexterity and they were struggling. So I think it really does depend on that context, as you've so rightly said. And you've touched upon the fact that you help people who are really motivated to make some changes. And I'm really curious about how you help to create a situation where people can change their circumstances and improve their health. Do you feel like it's important for someone to have clarity, for example, on what they want to change, and what kind of diet plan they want? Like, how do you kind of approach these conversations?
I don't think I would have an expectation for the individual to know what sort of diet plan they want. I mean, that's kind of assuming that they are able to make that kind of decision and choice and educated choice in the first place. For me, I'll kind of sit down and try and get an idea of what their needs are, from a clinician's point of view. But as you rightly said, I work with where they're at, and it really depends on what level of resistance they have. Some people are just super open to change and they're like, I'll take on anything you say. I'll make any of the changes you want me to make. Just tell me what to do. Then other people, they know that they should, but they really struggle to give up their favorite things. And they're almost quite reluctant to give up their favorite things. In that context, I will say to people, what do you enjoy eating? What's your favorite things? Get an idea of what they enjoy and say, right, it's time to give your favorites a facelift.
Oh, okay. I love it.
Yeah. So it's like, if your favorite meal is pizza, amazing. Let's make one. We'll get like a multi-grain bread mix from the local store. That's, a whole wheat version. Roll that out and create this incredible crust that isn't like 8 inches thick of refined white flour. Actually, it's got some fiber in it. And then we'll put some passata on it, maybe some wilted spinach and some red onion, and don't go mental with the cheese. Just put like a nice thin layer, but loads of other interesting flavors in there.
And it becomes a really healthy meal.
Exactly. And the thing is, they've still got the same culinary experience that they enjoy. And they're understanding why those changes are healthier. So, you're kind of keeping them in a comfort zone. You're giving them a little bit of education. You're showing them how, and you're helping them to transition into better habits. For a lot of people, if you try and just take everything away, then all of a sudden, like that inner recalcitrant teenager just pops up and starts rebelling and throwing the toys out the pram, and it just doesn't work. But if you actually show people that they can still have the food that they love, but just make it a little bit better, then certainly from a compliance point of view, I mean, like just as a clinician, like from a compliance point of view, it's much better. But from their point of view, the whole process of creating change is much more comfortable as well.
Yeah, it becomes a process of collaboration, doesn't it? Yeah. And it's something that was really important to me as well when I was writing my book. I wanted to be able to provide comfort food, recipes that people might enjoy from childhood, things that they could adapt, but would actually have healthy whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, herbs and spices, nuts and seeds, rather than some of the less healthy versions. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so I guess, for our listeners who are looking to make some changes, but they're not really sure where to start, would you have any sort of simple hints or tips that they could be getting on with that they might be able to take away today?
Change one thing. That's what I will say. Like, rather than, the level of overwhelm that can come with thinking about completely overhauling your diet overnight, which, to be honest, when you look at some of these fad diets and crazy like crash diet programs, it is like you're just changing everything. You're spending God knows how much on all sorts of strange things that you're maybe not familiar with. You're having to reinvent yourself overnight. For most people, they can last 4 or 5 days, maybe a week, and then fall flat on their face. What I say to people is change one thing. Think of one single thing that you can change, that you can change, that will actually be comfortable for you, and implement it. This could be as simple as, okay, with my lunch and dinner, I'm going to make sure I make a good dense side salad. Okay, I'm going to make sure that every day I just snack on fresh fruit instead of a chocolate bar. Okay, I'm going to make sure that at least one meal a day is a home cooked meal. Whatever you know that you can do, and start to implement it, and just keep repeating it day after day after day until it becomes the norm, until you don't have to kind of think about it, until it's a normal pattern. Then keep doing that, and then change one other thing, and then repeat that process. This may sound like baby steps, okay? But when you look back over 6 months, 12 months, you'll realize that you've progressed into a quite drastically different lifestyle, but you've done it in a way that is comfortable. It's a comfortable transition, and you've been able to learn about what works for you along the way.
I think that the other benefit of that is the benefit of feeling self-confidence and self-worth, because many of us think that if we don't completely overhaul our diet, that we are less than, that we have not enough willpower, that we're so stupid, or that why can't we just do this, and this? Whereas actually, if you can just do one thing and be consistent, then you can start to actually trust yourself. You can start to feel good about the things that you're achieving, and then move on from there. And I love that you said one more thing, because that fits really nicely. There's a behavioral change scientist, Professor B.J. Fogg from Stanford University. He says exactly the same thing, just one thing. And when you do that, it primes you for success. You can feel good about what you've done. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a very small shift, but it begins that process of awareness, that process of discovery, and also enjoyment, so that you can start to really enjoy the changes that you've managed to bring in, rather than thinking, oh no, I've failed. I didn't go to the gym 6 times this week, or whatever it might be. Yeah, so, that's brilliant. Now, obviously, you mentioned earlier your huge passion for food, and you create such delicious recipes. Did that come from, your discovery of how food could nourish you from within? Or is it something that you thought, well, actually, I need to teach other people to get them sort of inspired? Like, where did that sort of passion for actually creating the food and becoming good at cooking come from?
Because I've always loved food. That's literally what it boils down to.
Just like eating.
It's true. And, I've always liked things that are a little bit different, a little bit exotic, playing with all sorts of weird and wonderful flavors. I had an amazing palate as a kid. I wanted things with all sorts of different sauces and textures and all sorts of things going on before I was 10 years old. So I was always like a real foodie. And that's just kind of carried through for me. I mean, I just love to eat good food. So a lot of it actually came from when I decided that I was going to adopt a healthier way of eating. I needed to make sure that it was amazing for myself. Because trust me, if I thought that I was going to be eating lettuce and cardboard 3 times a day, I would have been back down the takeaway faster than you could blink, right? So for me, I was like, I need to make this taste amazing. I need to make food that is an incredible culinary experience, tastes awesome, that you really look forward to eating, and then by default does you good as well. If you can capture that, then you're never going to struggle again to stick to a healthy diet, because the food's just going to be so good.
Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. You never want to go back then, do you?
No.
And you mentioned you've tried all the different diets under the sun. Would you say you're quite familiar with fad diets then?
Well, I mean, there's some that really kind of stood out as fads that I never tried. I mean, it was mostly like the kind of well-established long-term different approaches. I didn't go near some of the fad diets, but yes, I'm certainly familiar with a lot of them. The amount of people that I've seen in practice that have been on all sorts of weird and wonderful diets, the conversations that I have, the stuff that I've seen on social media. I mean, that can be nothing short of mind-blowing. I'm sure you have the same experience where you see things and you're like, where on earth has that come from?
I do. But I mean, let's try and tease this out a bit for our listeners, because, we're all part of the world. We all look online. We all look at magazines. Well, not all of us, but there's a general understanding that, people should be a certain look or eating a certain thing. But what kind of red flags would alert somebody that something is a fad and that it might be worth avoiding?
I will say that if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. It's like if a dietary approach is sold as being the answer to everything, as being some kind of dietary utopia, a panacea that is the answer to every single one of the world's woes, then run a mile. And there's a lot of that out there. And, you kind of find a lot of tribalism in the different dietary camps as well. So that follows through. Like, but if you put like keto and plant-based people together, there's some that will tear shreds out of each other. So there's stuff like this going on all the time. But when you hear something sold as being the answer to everything, then smell a rat. That's generally what I say. I mean, and the thing is, the message has always been the same. For anyone that's studied nutrition, the message has been the same for decades. It's just like, build your diet around fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, whole grains, some lean proteins if you decide you want to eat some animal protein, and that's it. A whole foods diet. A whole foods diet. That's always been the case. That always will be the case. But it's not always headline worthy, is it? That's the problem.
I think this is it. It doesn't create headlines, and it's true. And I was looking into the True Health Initiative, which was set up by Dr. David Katz in the US. He's one of the founding members of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and he said the very same thing. He said, we got together hundreds of physicians and nutritionists across all different dietary proclivities and got them to essentially agree that the bulk of the research suggests that a healthy whole foods diet with plenty of fruits and vegetables, water for hydration, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, pulses, these are all great things for people's health, and hopefully, essentially, a fairly uniform message.
It is, but the crazy thing is, when I understand why the public often get so confused, because if you look at all the different diets that are out there, if you look, say, from low carb and keto to macrobiotic to whatever else, all of them report these incredible transformations. All of them report these incredible improvements in health in so many different ways. And you see, anecdotal, most of it, but you see these amazing stories of, losing weight and getting more energy and recovering from certain things. Some people end up scratching their heads thinking, well, which is the right approach? Which do I do? They're drastically different from one another. What most people don't talk about is the fact that there's one unifying factor in every single one of those approaches. They all leave out the rubbish that's making us sick in the first place. They are all, obviously there's different ratios and macros and stuff like that, but they're all essentially moving people back to whole foods.
Yeah,
and that's really what it comes down to. It's like, if you cut out the highly processed, highly refined junk that is fueling the flame of disease in so many of us, and actually move towards a good whole foods diet in a way that you will enjoy and actually stick to, then you're going to reap the benefits.
I agree. And I think it is a good message to share so people can understand those basics, and that people who are trained in nutrition, people who have been doing this for a long time, don't really disagree on that. So that's hopefully reassuring for people. I'd love to hear more about your new book, because I was absolutely thrilled to see that you had written a book about plant-based nutrition and how to get the most out of a plant-rich diet.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about where your passion for that came from and why you decided to write that book?
Well, it's bizarre. I was 100% plant-based for 21 years, and then through some weird twist of events, I ended up kind of veering away from that and experimenting with other approaches, particularly sort of the very low carb and keto kind of approach, which for the first maybe 18 months, 2 years was great. And then things started to break down and go wrong. And now I'm back to 100% plant-based diet, and I feel like I'm 16. It's ridiculous. Just everything about it I love, and remember why I loved it so much before. And obviously I wanted to create a book around that, but also so many of my followers had asked me to do one. So many of my followers had contacted me saying, look, I really want to adopt a plant-based diet, but I'm worried about some of the things that I could potentially get wrong, some of the things that could potentially be missing. I need to be aware of that. So I thought, well, I'm going to create a book that obviously sings the praises of all of the benefits that come from a plant-based diet. But also, I've got to talk about long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. I've got to talk about B12. I've got to talk about vitamin D. Some of these kind of things as well, and so people understand it, so they can take the right steps to avoid some of those issues that could crop up, so that they can adopt a good whole food plant-based diet and not have any kind of issues in the long term. And also, you know what? Because I've been creating that kind of food for such a long time, I knew that I was going to be able to knock the recipes out of the park as well. I mean, sorry, I sound like I'm bigging myself up there.
No,
but
that's fine. You can boast.
You know, because I've been cooking that kind of stuff for such a long time, I just know how to make that type of food really, really sing. And it's a book I'm very proud of. I think, you know, it's probably my favourite one yet.
It's a brilliant book, and I've really enjoyed looking at it, and I'm looking forward to making some of the recipes from it. And I think it's a great thing, because I suppose what you're saying really through all of this is, you know, we all go on our different journeys, but ultimately your passion really relies on evidence. It relies on your training. It relies on long-term health. And in order to, you know, succeed with long-term health, it's important to eat a lot more plants. And there's no getting away from that, really. Yeah. And so, I think that yes, the power of anecdote is very real. We're humans. We love a story. And in my book, I share some patient stories to help people understand the very real life human benefits from eating more plants. But also, you know, I share 600 references because, like you, I'm really interested in helping people to understand it's not a fad. If, you know, the broad spectrum of evidence from various different studies show that it is a healthy pattern and a healthy lifestyle. So I was absolutely thrilled to see it. And I love the way that you split the book up into different sections, you know, based on how to cook this great food, like how to make it easy, how to help it fit into your life, because that's what we all want. We want to make it simple, right?
Exactly. I mean, I don't like, well, I like spending hours in the kitchen. I don't often get that luxury because, you know, we're all running around like crazy things all of the time. Modern life is pretty bad. Obviously, it's slowed down a little bit for some of us lately, but there's always time pressures. There's always pressures on juggling careers and family and all that kind of stuff. It's got to be easy. You know, to quote Tony Robbins, complexity is the enemy of execution. Okay. If you make it difficult, if it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gotta love a bit of Tony.
I do. I do love Tony Robbins. He's like the forefather of self-help.
Yeah, that's like one person I'd love to have like a dinner party with. That'd be amazing. But if it is really, really complicated, if someone's got to spend hours in the kitchen, if they've got to get all sorts of weird and wonderful ingredients, I mean, you know, you look at some of these health books and it's like, you know, wonga wonga berries and organic biodynamic unicorn from a wizard in Nottingham. I mean, some of it is so ridiculous. I mean, like, you know, with some of the weird trends that have come like over the years, it automatically makes it inaccessible for so many people, and that's why some people recoil from the idea of adopting a healthier diet. But if you show people that, look, it's the simplest thing in the world, if you can have a whole chapter on one pot wonders. Yeah. Like set and forget, put everything in there, let it do its thing, go and do whatever else you want to do for 25 minutes, come back and it's done. You can't get easier than that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just thinking about Tony Robbins, actually, now that you've mentioned him. You know, he does these courses, and as part of his courses, he talks a lot about nutrition, actually, and fueling your body right so you can achieve the goals that you want in your life. And he shared some of his personal story. He I believe, has acromegaly. And so he, for a long time, had been looking for ways to optimize his long-term health. He was eating a lot of fish at one point to the stage where he actually developed heavy metal toxicity because he was having so much fish. And we know now that the oceans are not necessarily as free of pollutants as they once were. And now he really heavily talks about the benefits of plants. And, you know, he is plant-based himself, which is lovely. But I think that really sort of spoke to me because I realized that, you know, he's somebody who always looks to reach the optimal in terms of achievement and giving to others and being of service and fueling your body right. And so I found it really interesting that he also talks about the power of food and nutrition to do that as a nice base from which you can then achieve whatever goals you have. And, from you and your experience, I find it so important to share some of those nutritional benefits from your training. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about the nutritional side of your passion and why it's a great idea to eat more plants?
Wow. I mean, you could look at every single body system and you could find a benefit potentially. I mean, let's just look at the digestive health to start with. One of the things we know that a plant abundant diet provides such a whole broad spectrum of different types of dietary fibers. Some that are soluble, some that are insoluble, some that actually work as a food source for the gut flora. So one of the things that is going to benefit your health in so many different ways is nurturing your gut flora, that bacterial colony that lives in the gut that has that symbiotic relationship with us. These things, I mean, the roles that they play are almost mind-blowing. I mean, for a start, at a very basic level, they provide a physical barrier against attack from potentially pathogenic invaders that have found their way in via the digestive tract, but then they influence what the rest of the immune system is doing. There's actually a communication between this bacteria and the immune system via the lymphatics within the gut, and the whole range of different chemical messengers that get produced in that interaction that regulates immune processes. Like bacteria in your gut can regulate what a white blood cell in your big toe is doing via a chemical message, via this kind of interaction. Yeah, it's crazy. And then, then look into the cardiovascular system. With the cardiovascular system, I mean, like taking fats and everything out of the equation for the minute, one of the things that you find in abundance in a plant-based diet is a group of phytochemicals called polyphenols. Polyphenols are often color pigments. So they're the things that give blackberries and blueberries their dark purple color. They're the thing that give extra virgin olive oil that deep, vivid green color. They're they're found very broadly in the plant kingdom. And they've got some really interesting activities on cardiovascular health. One of the things that we understand about them now, I mean, a lot of this has come from the University of Reading via Professor Jeremy Spencer. I don't know if you've seen any of his work, but one of the things that we realize now is that on the inside of our blood vessels, there's like a skin that lines the inside. Okay, so the vessel obviously being like a tube that's made out of muscle, and on the inside there's a skin that lines it called the endothelium. This isn't just a skin, this isn't just like a film, this is a highly biologically active tissue that regulates many aspects of circulatory function, or like hemodynamics. One of the things that we know about the polyphenols, the flavonoids, is that they can get taken up by the endothelial cells, the cells that make up this lining. When the endothelial cells take up these polyphenols, the polyphenols cause almost like a metabolic distress response within those cells. And what that does is cause those cells to secrete a gas called nitric oxide. This is something that they do naturally anyway, but it dramatically stimulates the production and the release of nitric oxide. And that has two benefits. Firstly, as I said, it's a muscular tube. So the nitric oxide gas will leave the endothelial cells and move into the musculature of the vessel wall and cause the muscle fibers to relax. As the muscle fibers relax, that causes the vessel to dilate. As the vessel dilates, simple physics kicks in. The volume of fluid that's in there hasn't changed, but the vessel gets bigger, so the pressure against the vessel wall is reduced. And then the second benefit of nitric oxide is it actually strengthens the bonds between endothelial cells and makes the endothelium much more resilient to damage. Endothelial damage is the first part of the whole pathophysiological process of cardiovascular disease. It's damage to the endothelium and all of the kind of inflammatory cascades and everything that follows that essentially causes atheroma, the actual fatty plaques within blood vessels. So just by increasing your intake of polyphenols, I mean, looking at the work from the University of Reading, they were giving people increasing doses of polyphenols from berries and from dark chocolate. And they were measuring what's called flow-mediated dilatation using like an ultrasound on the brachial artery. And they were showing the more polyphenols were coming in, the more there was this increase in blood flow and this dilation of the blood vessels via that nitric oxide expression. So the take home there is they can play a role in managing blood pressure and also reducing risk of endothelial damage or vascular damage. So that's just two things. And then, the sheer density of micronutrients that are in there, you kind of think, if someone's moving from a diet of highly processed junk food to a whole foods plant-based diet, the sheer amount of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, etc., that they're getting in every single meal is going to be absolutely mind-boggling. So they're going to feel more energetic. They're going to, everything's just going to start functioning a bit better because there's more nutrients there. Skin health. Oh, this is a big one. This is obviously one of my real obsessions, because I got into nutrition because I had skin issues. One of the things that you find abundantly in a plant-based diet is a group of phytochemicals called carotenoids. These give yellow and orange and some of the lighter reds in food. So think sweet potatoes, mangoes, carrots, red peppers, those kinds of things. Carotenoids, they're a type of antioxidant, but they're a fat-soluble antioxidant. You always hear people going on about antioxidants for the skin, but most of the time the stuff they're talking about has got no relevance to the skin. Thousands of different types of antioxidants, but in general, you can put antioxidants into two distinct groups. You've got water-soluble, like vitamin C. That means it delivers its benefit within systemic circulation over a limited period of time. Then it's metabolized and excreted, it's gone, it's done. Then you've got the fat-soluble antioxidants, like the carotenoids. The fat-soluble ones, they don't stay in circulation very long. By their very nature, they want to migrate into fatty tissues. Second to the brain, the most abundant fatty tissue in the body is the subcutaneous layer of the skin. And within the subcutaneous layer, you've got very important structures like collagen and elastin, which is like that kind of crisscross lattice of protein fibers that gives skin its structural integrity. And then you've also got structures like the pilosebaceous unit, which is where the hair follicle and the oil-producing gland meet. That is the area that flares up in an acne infection, for example. The thing is, because those compounds can actually move into that tissue, they can accumulate there quite easily. And there's even a condition that you find in people that are really into juicing and stuff like that called hypercarotinemia, which is where the skin takes on an orange tone. Maybe that explains Love Island. I don't know, but it kind of it's testament to how effectively these things will actually start to accumulate in that layer. When they accumulate there, they can deliver a localized antioxidant activity. There's loads of data out there that's shown that it can influence things like how susceptible the skin is to burning. That doesn't mean that eat a carrot, don't wear sunscreen. That's not what it says at all. But it can offer this localized protection to these things like the collagen and elastin fibers that are susceptible to oxidative damage. So, that's just picking three things out of the sky, and you can see already the abundance of different benefits that can be derived from it.
I absolutely love that monologue. Dale Pinnock, you are a real powerhouse of knowledge and information. And just to hear you talking about the blood vessels got me so excited. And then you started talking about the skin. And I love the conversation around carotenoids and, why they are helpful. Just to try and break it down in a simpler way as possible. If you can make the blood vessels more supple, then your blood pressure goes down and you're able to have a more responsive vascular system. If you have lots of fruits and vegetables, then your skin can also retain its suppleness and its ability to withstand trauma. So, it's just a lovely way of helping us to really understand why plants do us good.
Yes.
Because many people want to learn more about nutrition, but they don't know where to go for a trustworthy source of information. So tell us all about your online program.
Yeah, so basically I developed this course for the people that didn't necessarily want to go to university and do like 3-4 years full time. It's for people that wanted a really deep understanding, that maybe want to work in coaching roles. Some of the graduates have been working in care homes and actually devising menus around some of the needs that the residents there had. I mean, it's very, very diverse. It is 100% online. It has now become the most highly accredited online nutrition course of its type in the world, on the planet now. It took a long time and lots of changing and tweaking and working with different accrediting bodies, and we've got such diverse accreditation. It's a recognised qualification in 37 countries now, and
you must be so proud.
I am, yeah. It's like my baby. It's kind of like it started off as this kind of strange, scraggly little creature that's grown into like this beautiful being, and the thing is, it's open to all levels. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a science background. To give you an idea, the students on the course, everything from high school students to retired teachers to doctors to NHS dietitians to people that are just interested in nutrition and just want to understand it at a deep level. There's no prerequisite. It doesn't matter what your background is. You can get any bit of support that you want. You just pick up the phone and have support, and we'll walk you through every single stage. There is quite, it is very academic. We expect students to do a lot of their own research and to reference things properly and to make sure they're using primary sources rather than, secondary sources of research. So there is that expectation, but we guide you all through it. And it's really taking the science of nutrition at quite a deep level, but then showing you how that fits potentially into disease process or disease management, and then taking that to what happens in the kitchen so that you get all that science and then understand how to put that into breakfast, lunch, dinner, how to actually build meal plans and dietary protocols around that information.
Amazing. So if you want to do a deep dive and learn more about nutrition and how to help others with it, then the online course is really valuable. But if you want to just eat great food, then of course the books will be more for you.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, Dale, we're going to have to draw this to a close. I've absolutely loved every minute of it. I really enjoy hearing you talk about nutrition. Your passion shines through, and as does your knowledge. And I want to say huge thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure.
It's always good to talk.
Thank you so much for joining me today for what was an incredibly fascinating conversation with Dale Pinnock. We talked about all sorts of things nutrition and went on a real deep dive, which I felt was particularly interesting. If you liked it, please do share with us that you did. Please do also check out the Holland & Barrett website, where you can catch the video version of the podcast at hollandandbarrett.com. And of course, you can catch this podcast on any of your favourite podcast platforms. Do join us again next time for another great conversation with special expert guest, helping us to incorporate wellness into our day. All views and experiences talked about on this podcast are those of our guests and do not reflect the views of Holland & Barrett.